So like the AR talk, this requires iOS 12 and Xcode 10. And I just want to start with a simple example of a random number generator. And so if you learned nothing from the agenda talk, you should hire a designer. And you should see that I didn't. And so if I tap the screen, I will generate random numbers. And so there's a 1 and a 1, so I can repeat numbers, and a 4. And I'm just choosing numbers between 1 and 10. And the idea is this is a simple app, and we're going to donate these actions to Siri Shortcuts so that they will advertise them through things that you can tap on your screen, even when your app's in the background or not even running. And so you have to think, what's the activity you want to donate? And for now, I'm going to donate the tapping of the screen. So I'm going to donate a shortcut every time the user taps the screen. And that's just a simplicity thing for now. You might not want to do it every time because you might want to help Siri infer, when's a good time to donate so they can suggest it to people, like, I'll only donate it if they do it in the morning, or I'll only donate it if they do it at work when they're supposed to be working. And so I have my random number view controller, and as you can see, the name is longer than the code itself. And inside it, I have my IB action. And my IB action happens every time I tap the screen, and it's a private function, and the private function is going to call the next random number, so I'm keeping my action private. This is the guy I'm going to donate. When I generate my next random number, that's what I'm going to donate. And so let's see how we do that. I'll create a random number. Those of you that were in the class yesterday know that, okay, so this is okay for a little demo app, but I'm creating a random number between 1 and 10 in this case, and then that's the thing I'm going to donate. When I donate my random number, this is one of my favorite things to do in Swift, is I have my computed property. It is an optional int, and so whenever didset gets called, I'm going to update what the view is. I mean, didset is just magical. Oh, why can't we use reactive? Come on. So every time we call next random number, I'm going to donate, and I like splitting things into separate little testable, little small functions, little small methods. And for our first case, we're going to donate it as a user activity. In our second example, we're going to donate intents, but user activity is the simplest way to do it. And so we create an instance of a user activity. And so user activities you might know from continuations when you're handing things off to different devices. Here my activity type is com.example.random.next. The things that have updated since the WWDC videos, and the WWDC videos were very good, and they were full of lots of great information, but they also talked about this had to be in your info plist. It actually doesn't. And the way I found that out was I had it in my info plist, but I'd spelled it incorrectly, and it still worked. So it turns out it doesn't have to be there, but it does have to be here. This is what I'm donating. I'm donating a user activity, and I want it to be eligible for prediction. I don't really care if it's eligible for search, but a requirement of being eligible for prediction is you also have to set it to be eligible for search. I'm setting the title to be next number because I'm from the US, and because we only speak one language and we assume everybody else does. I haven't localized this app in any way. Shame on me. Although I think if you're from the US and you localize apps, you get on a special list now. You can edit that out of the video. So I'm setting my user activity to be this user activity I created, and this is kind of interesting because this is the step. Those of you that haven't done this type of work don't know that this is a property on UI View Controller, and so this is the step where you're actually donating. You're saying, this is my user activity, and this is the step where you've announced to the system, here's my user activity, and so it's been donated. That's the first step. So I've donated whenever I tap the screen. And now what I want to do is have some shortcut that when I tap it, I come back in and I find the next number. And so I have to think about what I'm going to do to continue this behavior. And so in my app delegate, I add this method. You don't get code completion for this. That's why I'm laughing. The first thing you're going to check with a guard is that the activity type that called you back is the one that you donated. You might have donated lots of different ones, and I'm only reacting to this one. You make sure that you type it correctly. You might want to put this string in a constants file somewhere so that you're not testing against a string where you can make typos, but you're testing against some constant. I'm guard letting that the window actually exists, but if the window doesn't exist, we've got bigger problems. Once I have the window existing, we're going to reconstitute and create an instance of this view controller. And so a lot of things can go wrong. And I love doing this in the guard let because you can say, look, my storyboard, my main storyboard, if it exists, I want to instantiate the initial view controller if that exists. And if it exists, I want to make sure that it is that type that I have the code for. And I love that we can do all of this. I don't have anything bad to say about Objective-C, but I just love being able to do this in Swift in such a nice way. If any of those go wrong, if it's the wrong activity type, if the window couldn't be created, if the view controller, anything went wrong, I'm going to return false from here. If everything went right, I'm going to set the Windows root view controller to be this guy that I just created, and I'm going to ask it to give me the next random number. And so I'm calling back that thing that I donated, and I'm getting the next random number, and it expects a bool back, so I return true. Apple has made it easier for you as developers to see what's going on. You just go here to your settings, and you go down to developer, and you scroll all the way, and you set these two things up, display recent shortcuts, and display donations on the lock screen, and that'll make it easier for you while you're developing. When you're not developing, turn them off, because it's very verbose. You'll see these things a lot, and you go, oh, I just hate this. Okay, so let's go ahead and tap the shortcut. And so we bring down our notifications. There's our next number that we donated. It worked. Not raucous applause. There you go. Because, Keynote had to compile and then run that. The other thing we can do now that we've donated a shortcut is we can add it to Siri. And so if you go into your Siri and you look at the suggested shortcuts, you'll see that you can add this to Siri, and you hold down and you can say, hey Siri, this is what I want to use as my phrase for this guy, next number, and now you've created the shortcut so you can activate it by the voice or you can tap it. You now have a Siri shortcut, hence the name. Again, I'm only working in English here. You would use with localization to make sure that you did this to wherever, but users find themselves on that Siri shortcut and they panic. What am I supposed to say? So you can suggest something to them and just say next random number. This, of course, is your opportunity to mess with them as well. And so now with that suggested phrase, now when you come in and you hit that Siri shortcut, it suggests next random number, and so you can dictate that. It's not a requirement. You could then record anything you want, but it's a way of just letting them know, here's something you might want to say. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see what happens when I run this. And one thing you may or may not have noticed, when I tap this, look at it run, and what comes up on the screen, did you see it said tap there for a second? Oh my God, that's sloppy. Who wrote this? So let's run it again, and you'll see when I tap the shortcut, for a second when the app comes to life, it says tap, and then it goes to the number 8. So there's this story when Apple was developing the first iPod, the one with the little scroll wheel, and there were two numbers that were displayed as the song was playing, the time elapsed and the time remaining, and when they took it into Steve Jobs one day, he noticed that these things didn't always add up to the total time of the song. And he just did it by looking and saying, well, sometimes they sum to an odd number and sometimes to an even number in the same song. It's those little things that your users might not even know why they think your app isn't great, but it's these little things that nag at them. And so if you tapped last time and it was a 2, then when this comes back to life, I'd like to see a 2 and then the next number. I don't want to see it start all over again with tap. And we can do that in a user activity with the user info dictionary. I know, 2018, we're still using user info dictionaries. So, I'm setting up my user activity. If I have a random number, then I'm going to store it away in my user activity. And so I have my user activity user info dictionary, and I'm going to use the key number, and the value is this int, this random number between 1 and 10 that I'm choosing. And so when I come back to life, I'm going to want to be able to, before I transition to the next random number, I want to display the one that I stored. And so I have to expose some functionality to allow me to display that 2 or whatever was the last number. And so I'm going to create this display current, and you can tell me what the current number is. And now when I go back to the app delegate, and I'm coming back to life, and I check that everything's right and the root view controller is what I want, I'm also going to check, do I have user info here? Because maybe I don't. But if I have user info, do I have an entry with the key number? And if I have an entry with the key number, is it an int? And if it is, let's store it away as number, and now I can use that little facility to say, okay, display that number that I had last time. It's a little thing. Most of your users will not notice it, but here when I run it again this time, and I run it from here, and I tap it, it had the last number before it transitioned to this number. And aside, when I go down and show you notifications, it's the first picture I ever took with my iPhone when I had my first iPhone. My daughter was 10, and I included it to embarrass her now that she's 22. So, it's my hope once the video hits, I'll say, look, 3 minutes in. Isn't that you? Okay, my second example is moods. Here's my second app where we can set our mood with the slider, and whether I'm very something or I'm just a little bit something. Did I mention you should hire a designer? I know, I'm very proud of this. And then I can hit the record button when I want to record a mood. Oh wait, here comes the good part. There's a record of my mood. Wow. So here's my app. My app is done in more than one target, and that's what I wanted to point out. I have this mood app, and so the core of the mood app are these files here. These are the model. So I have a mood entry, I have a history where I write it to disk, and I have an emotion. And so let's look quickly at what those are. My mood consists of an emotion and a Boolean. And so emotion is actually an emotion type. And the is emphasized, which is whether the toggle switch is on or off, is bool, so I can be very happy or just happy. I can be neutral or very neutral. So here are my 3 moods that I stored my emotions: sad, neutral, and happy, and I can be extremely one of those or not. And that's my model. Here I am in the view controller part of this. I have the view controller for the smiley face, and I have a view controller for the table view. For the smiley face, I have my mood view controller, and every time I hit that record action button, it will set the mood. And it sets the mood by looking at, well, what is the value of the slider, and is that toggle switch on or off? And from those 2 things, I will set the mood, which remember was an emotion, happy, neutral, sad, or it vary or not vary, whether that's on or not. And then I'll write it to the history using this. Basically, it's just using Codable to write it to disk. So I'm going to donate the mood this time, not using a user activity, but using a custom intent. And this is new. We've had Siri intents where they gave us intents for, ordering a car, paying for something. They gave us a list. Now we can create our own custom intents. And so you'll add a Siri intent definition file to the mood core. It's there. On your Xcode, there's not a red circle around it. I know, it's such a ripoff. It doesn't look like he said. I'm going to call it intents. I'm going to put it in the resources file of my model target. And if you look, I have 2 targets. I'm adding it to my model target, and now I'm going to add an intent. So you created this intents file. In the bottom left, there's a plus, and if you hit the plus, you create a new intent, and you can give it a name. I'm calling it record mood, because I'm going to record my mood. It has automatically a response associated with it, and you're going to do some configuration. you're going to decide what category. And there's a bunch of categories that it gives to you, like save or set or buy or purchase. I'm choosing post. It doesn't really matter. It's just so that Siri can say the right things. Do you want to post this? You posted this. It's going to use the right words for you. And because it's the words they chose, it's available for localization. They've done the locale for you. My title is I record mood. My description is records current mood. And I've decided that user confirmation is required. Maybe we don't need that, but it's just so that we can see the extra UI. If you're doing a purchase, you definitely want to allow the user to say, no, 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 don't buy that thing. We're going to sell the conference dog later. Okay. So, here I am in my custom intent, and I add parameters. And the parameters you add, you're going to be able to use in the discussions you have with the people. And I think the hardest thing to get out of this Siri Shortcuts thing is what you're setting up here is the dialogue you're going to have with people. And what you have over here is the code that makes this stuff work. And so you're going to tie these things together. But this is all about how you're going to interface with people. And it was really a little confusing to decide what should be chosen here. My first thing for emotion, one of the choices is an enum. And I thought, well, it's happy, neutral, or sad. I should choose an enum. But if you do that, you're really writing that same enum in two different parts of your app. And so instead, I've chosen a custom type, and all I have to do is say, okay, you've chosen an emotion. I have to convert between the words that we use to describe that emotion and an emotion case in my enum. And so instead of creating parallel enums and having to translate between them, I'm creating a custom class, and I'll show you how we translate back and forth. The other thing is emphasized felt to me like it should be a bool. So I went to choose the type bool. There is no type bool, which was a hint. And that's where I started to understand this is for communicating with people, and you're not just going to communicate with them by saying true and false. You're going to communicate by saying things like very or not very. You're going to use words. And so we're going to have strings here, and we're going to have strings that somehow map to my true or false bools. So now that I have my parameters, I can build my interaction with my users based on these parameters. And so I'm going to add a shortcut type that uses both emotion and is emphasized. And so when I display to the user, I'm going to register whatever word they chose for the emotion, and my subtitle is going to be with is emphasized certainty. So the word, that string from is emphasized, will be displayed there. The custom class from the emotion will be displayed there. And I'm going to support background execution. This turns out to be a trick, because when you actually want to support background execution, you have to turn it off, build it, turn it back on, build it again, and now it says, oh, you really mean it this time. But there's a checkbox there. The other thing is, I got to look over here and say, I want to be able to talk to this intent not only from the model, but from my view controller. And if I want to talk to it from the view controller, then these classes that are generated from this GUI that I just set up have to be visible from that target as well. But I don't want to generate classes for both of them, so I'm only generating the classes for the model target, but I want them to be visible. It's like I've had an import for them both places. And so I'm generating a class and some protocols that you'll see later. And now I've got this model class, and I've got this intent. I need to translate between the two of them. I need to translate between the intent and the mood. And it's like JSON, right? We're serializing this. We're storing this thing to disk. We're translating it from mood to intent, from intent to mood. And so how do I start with a mood and get it to that intent that I just created? So I'm going to create an extension to my mood, and I'm going to add to it a computed property. And the computed property has an intent that is of type record mood intent. And that's one of the classes that is generated by that GUI that we just configured. And so it knows that you have two parameters. It knows what the greeting is. And so let's go ahead and work with that. My intent that I'm going to create is a record mood intent. It is a custom class. And so now I have to convert my emotion name, because that was the parameter that was in my GUI that I want to set up. And I'm going to do it by reading from my custom class, which is a type of IN object. I've got to say, I almost broke down and cried at this point. Because core data has this. Everything's an NS managed object. Aren't we in a world of value types? And here I am in an IN object. And an IN object has an identifier that it reads that parameter emotion. It says you have a raw value. And I have a display, and I'm going to read from my emotion and get its raw value. My emotion is happy, neutral, or sad. And so what I'm doing is I'm setting up my custom object, and its identifier and its display is either going to be the string happy, neutral, or sad. I'm reading it from my mood, and I'm producing my intent from my mood. And so my emotion name that I'm going to display is just that happy, neutral, or sad. Is emphasized is a Boolean, but I'm creating the is emphasized parameter for my custom intent, and I'm going to do that by saying, if you're in emphasized, your keyword is with. If your is emphasized is false, your keyword is without. So let's see. My mood is I'm happy with emphasis, without emphasis. I mean, it's not genius, but it's how we convert between one and the other. How do I go the other direction? You start with your intent. How do you get a mood out of that? I'm going to do a failable initializer. I have a failable initializer. I pass it my intent. I read my intent's emotion name, if it exists. I get its display string. If it exists, I unwrap it into my raw value, and now I use this init for emotions. You know, every enumeration that is backed by an associated type has this, where I can create it from its raw value. That emotion raw value is a failable initializer, so it could fail. If it doesn't fail, I store that in my emotion. Is emphasized. Is emphasized should be the string with or without. And I want to convert it into true or false. So my intermediate step is I'm going to just read that string with or without. Well, what if it's not with or without? Well, I'm going to take a step to make sure that it's in my list of allowable strings, which are just with and without. And if any of these things fail, I return nil. It's our favorite part. If they didn't fail, I set my Boolean and I set my emotion. So my emotion is easy. I've already decoded that. And for my Boolean, I just check to see it's either with or without. If it's with, then I set my Boolean to be true. And if it's without, it's going to be false. Man, that was a lot of work. Was that worth it? Yes. Because with the other case, with the user activity, I could only store things in the user info dictionary. There wasn't a lot I could do. And also in this case, I'm going to be able to work from the background without starting my app back up. So let's donate our activity. So here I am setting the mood. Is your mood set? You've done your slider. You've done your little toggle switch. You've hit the record button. And after I've determined my mood and written it to my history, I'm going to donate that action. And here's how I donate the action. I create my donate entry. I pass in the mood. I cannot, because this would be just too easy, I cannot just donate an intent. I have to create an interaction that contains the intent, right? It's like a buffered string reader that has a, you know what I mean. And now you donate it. So I take my interaction I've created and I donate it, and as programmers, if anything goes wrong, we print out the error and we go on with our lives. Okay? So I've donated my entry, and now when it's time to come back to life, I've got to reconstruct, because I might have an unhappy face on the screen the last time I went away, and the user has chosen to reconstitute with the happy face. And so I have to reconstitute. I have to set something that will set the interface back again. And so if I have a mood that I pass in, it's got to set things like the slider. The slider's got to be in the right position. It's got to select that toggle button and turn it on or off, depending on whether I'm emphasized or not. And it's going to set the color and the smiliness of the head. And once I've done all that, I'll set the mood. It's as if I hit record mood again. So that's how I reconstitute. Let's go to the app delegate. You guys doing okay? You need a break? Just checking. So let's go to the app delegate. Same delegate method. Notice that we aren't using this com.example. Automatically, Apple said, if you're using a custom intent, the name of that custom intent is the user activity's activity type. It's using that record mood intent that we set. Great. So I've come back to life. I look at the user activity's interaction, because remember, we tucked the intent away inside an interaction. If there's an interaction, I am optional chaining. I look inside to say, well, does that interaction contain an intent? If it does, is it the right type? Is it a record mood intent? If it is, then that is my intent. I get my mood from the intent using the failable initializer, but these are all being guard-leaded, so I'm unwrapping them for the left side. So my mood is an actual mood object, and now I just work with the GUI to say, I've got this tab bar. I want to make sure that I've set up my tab bar. I want to make sure that I've selected the first tab in the tab bar and that it's a mood view controller. And if all that is right, well, if anything's wrong, I return false. But if all that is right, then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I select the first tab in the tab bar, and I call that set interface, and I pass in the mood, and it will set the slider and the toggle button and the color of the face and the smiliness. And so that will reconstitute everything. So that's more interaction, but the other thing that we get from a custom intent that we don't get from a user activity is we get to work from updating in the background. If my app isn't even running, I can run a Siri shortcut and write to the history and see that more things happened. In order to update in the background, you have to create an intent extension. So now I'm going to have 3 targets: my GUI, my model, and my app extension, my intent extension, and I'm going to have them write to a common app group so that they're writing to the same location. So if I write to the history from this intent extension, it's still able to be read from the main app. And so I create an app group and I write to that app group. Here's my intent extension. I'm not creating a custom UI because I noticed I haven't hired a designer still. And so it's just an intent extension. Make sure that your intent can be seen by this new extension, and I'm still not generating classes from it. You're in trouble if you've generated classes for more than one target, because now who sees what? So I'm only generating classes for this mood core, but I'm looking at it from my GUI and from my app extension. So let's create our background behavior. My background behavior, I've imported my intents, I've imported my mood core, and I'm creating this class called intent handler that conforms to IN extension, and it conforms to record mood intent handling. That's another thing that was generated by my GUI. It's a protocol generated by that. The first method is essential. You're saying, who's going to handle this work? And your answer is, well, I am. If you don't have this in, it won't know to look here for the rest of these methods. And so when it's time to actually handle something, it will call this, it'll say handle, it'll pass in the intent, it'll pass in the completion, and now it'll look for what it's going to do. And so I'm going to use this failable initializer. You gave me an intent. I'm going to reconstitute a mood from it. I'm going to create this thing that can write to disk, this history object. I'm going to write my history. That's how I get the little emojis on the table view. And now, if everything went right, I'm going to call my completion that you passed in on a record mood intent response, yet another thing that was generated from this GUI. Pass in that the code was .success. Oh my gosh, we love enums because we know the codes can only be these. And my user activity is nil. If anything went wrong, I call the completion on the code failure. And now it can work from the background. So let's demo it. I run my moods. So let's see what we do here. I recorded one. I recorded another. I'm very happy. I'm just unhappy. Do I record neutral? Okay, there's the ones I've done so far. I quit the app. It's not even running. There. I quit the app. It's not even running. And now I run my mood shortcut from the background. Register sad without emphasis. We got that text from that custom parameters. We've run it. We open this back up, and it just added another sad there. Now what would you pay for Siri Shortcuts? It's pretty neat. You can, of course, have a custom Siri suggestion. And so when it comes time to donate your entry, we can make this a little more complicated and have a whole method to donate your intent for a mood. And so let's create our intent for a given mood, and let's move it up the slide so we can read it. My intent is my moods.intent. That is the computed property that computes the intent from the mood. I create the modifier, so mood is emphasized as either true or false. If it's true, I'm going to use very. If it's false, I'm not going to use anything. So if it's true, I'm very happy. If it's false, I'm just happy. Okay? So the modifier is going to be this text that I display. My mood description is what I get when I look at my emotion, which was this enum, and I ask for its raw value. So it will give me the string happy, neutral, or sad. And I put those together, and I get very happy, neutral, very sad. And my suggested invocation phrase is what I get when I put those together, feeling very or not very, happy, sad, neutral. Now, before, you saw when we created our record mood, we had this response thing. We can customize our response. And again, we can set properties. I'm going to call the custom one emotion name again because I'm still using happy, neutral, or sad. For the toggle, the true or false, I'm not going to use the same name I used before, is emphasized. I'm going to use very or nothing because I'm using very or nothing. See how cleverly that's named? And now, I added a custom success response. I am feeling very or nothing, happy, sad, or neutral. And I have a confirmation that's the same thing. So I've created these custom responses. So if you go back to your handle method, we're going to change how we handle these guys, and we reconstitute our emotion name. And we get our very or nothing by looking at our is emphasized. And we put this together. And I don't know if you remember, but when we did this before without it being a custom response, it was the record mood intent response, and then it was code : .success. This is record mood intent response, call the success method, and pass it in the information it needs to create the custom response. And it knows, because we set those parameters, that it needs the value of very or nothing, and it needs the value of the emotion name. We also set up confirm. Confirm is not part of handle, so we have to now implement this confirm method. Implementing this confirm method, we again reconstitute our very or nothing and our emotion, and this time we create our record mood intent response dot confirm method and pass in the very or nothing or the emotion name. And so let's run this with a custom response. Register happy with emphasis, post it, confirmed. Isn't that awesome? And remember, we also added a custom suggestion that we read from here. And so our custom suggestion Dependent on whether they chose happy, neutral, or sad, I'm going to register happy with emphasis. And when I ask, it says, well, feeling very happy. So I'm feeling very happy about Siri Shortcuts. Now, Siri Shortcuts are pretty powerful. And Apple's Shortcut app allows us to build these workflows. What we can't do yet is pass from one of our shortcuts to another. So for instance, it'd be kind of awesome if I could just have a random mood based on the number I got when I tapped. But I can't pipe from one to another yet. That's something that we might get next year. You often see when Apple introduces a new technology that their apps can do stuff with it one year and then we get it the next year or the year after they've knocked kinks out, or they abandon it, one way or the other. So, we did user activities with user info. We built custom intents. Go build your Siri shortcuts. Thank you.